I stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to stop my hands from shaking. The white dress fit perfectly, silk cascading in delicate waves, intricate lace hand-stitched to frame my waist. The stylist had just finished securing my veil, and now all that was left to do was wait. A few more hours, and I would officially become Mrs. Natalie Brooks. My best friend and maid of honor, Ashley, walked into the bridal suite, carrying 2 champagne glasses. "All right, bride-to-be, ready to be a wife?" I took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Of course." "Good, because I'm in full celebration mode, and if anyone tries to ruin your day, I'll personally take them out," she said with a wink. I laughed. Ashley always knew how to ease my nerves. But deep inside, a strange unease was still there. Maybe it was just pre-wedding jitters? Every bride goes through this. Probably. I took a sip of champagne. That was when the door swung open without a knock. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor Brooks, my future mother-in-law. And she looked like she had just escaped from a Mardi Gras parade. Her dress was covered in tiny sequins, shimmering aggressively under the chandelier lights. An enormous, ridiculous floral headpiece sat atop her styled curls, making her look like she was being consumed by a giant orchid. Everything about her screamed, "I'm the main character here." She scanned me from head to toe, her expression unreadable, then curled her lips into a tight-lipped smile. "Oh, so this is the dress." Her voice was sickly sweet, but dripping with venom underneath. I tightened my grip around my champagne flute. "Yes. Do you like it?" She tilted her head slightly, giving the kind of look someone gives a questionable dish at a restaurant. "Well, I thought it would be a bit more traditional. But maybe it's just the lighting." Heat rose to my cheeks, but I kept my expression neutral. I had learned to tolerate her little passive-aggressive jabs. From the moment Brian and I started dating, she made it clear I wasn't good enough for her son. "She looks stunning, Mrs. Brooks," Ashley cut in sharply, folding her arms. "It's a custom design, not some mass-market dress from a department store." Eleanor's smile faltered for half a second before she turned on her heel and strutted out, leaving behind a heavy silence. I exhaled. "Is she serious?" "Hey, just breathe," Ashley reassured me, squeezing my arm. "Do not let her get to you. This is your wedding, not hers." I nodded, but the unease didn't fade. The ceremony began under the soft melody of classical music. Guests stood as I walked down the aisle, all eyes on me. But the only eyes I cared about were the ones waiting for me at the altar. Brian. He stood tall in his perfectly tailored suit. He looked handsome, but something was off. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was distant, scanning the room, as if searching for someone else. When I finally reached him, he met my eyes, but his smile was wrong. Stiff. Forced. I didn't have time to process it. The officiant began speaking. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of 2 hearts." I swallowed hard. It was just nerves. "He's nervous too. That's all." I reached for his hand. It was cold. The officiant invited me to say my vows. I took a breath, ignored the growing discomfort, and smiled at Brian. "Brian, I promise to love you in joy and sorrow, to be your support, your partner, your best friend. You're my destiny." The crowd beamed. I looked into my soon-to-be husband's eyes, waiting for some sign of warmth, of love. But instead, he pulled out his phone. The glow of the screen lit up his face as he quickly skimmed through his messages. My stomach dropped. He's not even listening. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. "Brian? It's your turn." Brian jerked his head up like he had just snapped back to reality, then hurriedly shoved his phone into his pocket. "Oh, all right. Sorry." He coughed, put on a sheepish smile, and began. "Natalie, I promise to be with you. Always. In good times and bad. You are wonderful." His voice was flat. Empty. Like he was reading a grocery list. The guests exchanged uncertain glances. My chest tightened. When the officiant finally declared us husband and wife, Brian leaned in, pressed a quick, lifeless kiss to my lips, and barely lingered before turning his gaze elsewhere. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. At the reception, The ballroom buzzed with laughter and music. Guests danced, clinked glasses, and celebrated. I tried to join in, to feel the joy of the moment, but my brand new husband was glued to his phone. Ashley appeared beside me. "What the hell is he doing?" "He says it's work," I replied, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "At his own damn wedding?" I sighed. "I'll talk to him." I walked over to Brian's table and leaned in close. "Brian, what's going on?" I whispered. He didn't even look up. "Sorry, Nat, it's important. Just give me a sec." I clenched my jaw. "This is our day. Can you put your phone away for 5 minutes?" He exhaled heavily, like I was inconveniencing him. Without another word, I turned and walked away. Ashley was waiting for me nearby. "Natalie," she whispered urgently, her eyes darting toward the far end of the room. "You need to see this." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What?" She subtly nodded toward Brian's table. I turned. Brian was leaning in close to someone. A woman. Long dark hair, perfectly styled. She was smiling at him. Not just a polite smile. A smile that sent alarm bells ringing. My heart stopped. Who the hell is she? I couldn't stop staring. The woman sitting beside Brian was stunning, long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, a dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. But it wasn't just her looks that unsettled me. It was the way she was looking at my husband. Like she already knew him. Like she belonged next to him. And then there was Brian, smiling at her, leaning in, whispering something that made her laugh softly, her perfectly manicured hand resting lightly on his arm. His arm. My husband's arm. I felt like I had been sucker punched. "Who the hell is she?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Ashley, standing beside me, was already 2 steps ahead. "That's what we're about to find out," she muttered and stormed toward the table. "Ash, wait." I grabbed her wrist, but she shook me off. It was too late. Brian barely had time to react before Ashley slid into the empty seat beside him, smiling way too brightly. "Hi, sorry to interrupt. I'm Ashley, the maid of honor, and you are." The woman's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she turned to me, her green eyes sharp, assessing. "Oh, Natalie. You must be the bride." Her voice was warm, friendly even, but something about her felt rehearsed, calculated. I forced a tight-lipped smile. "I am." "And you are?" She placed a delicate hand on her chest, as if surprised by the question. "Oh!" "I'm Valerie." Silence. She clearly expected me to recognize the name. I didn't. Brian shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "Nat, it's nothing." Ashley cut him off. "So, Valerie, how do you know Brian?" Valerie's smile widened just enough to make my stomach churn. "Oh, Brian and I go way back." A chill crawled up my spine. Brian froze. And that's when I knew. It wasn't just some random guest. It wasn't just some old acquaintance. She was someone. Someone that made my new husband look guilty as hell. I opened my mouth, but before I could ask anything else, Valerie placed a hand on Brian's arm again and laughed softly. "But we can talk about that later. Tonight is all about you two. Your big day." She turned to me and raised her champagne glass. "To the happy couple." Everyone at the table clinked their glasses, except me. My fingers felt numb as I slowly raised mine, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who was she? What did she mean way back? And why did Brian suddenly look like he wanted to be anywhere but here? The rest of the night passed in a blur of fake smiles and empty conversations. Every time I looked up, Valerie was there. She was always near Brian, laughing at his jokes, brushing her fingers against his wrist. And every single time, my gut told me, this isn't nothing. This is something. The reception dragged on, but I was barely present. My body moved through the motions, posing for pictures, cutting the cake, dancing with Brian, but my mind was trapped in a loop of suspicion and doubt. By the time the final guests started leaving, I felt exhausted. Ashley stuck by my side, eyes sharp, watching Brian like a hawk. "You're not crazy, Nat," she whispered at one point. "Something is off. I don't trust her. I don't trust him." Neither did I. Finally, when the ballroom had mostly emptied, I pulled Brian aside near the exit. The honeymoon suite awaited us upstairs, but I couldn't step into that room with him without answers. Who is she? My voice was calm, controlled. Deadly. Brian ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Nat, she's just someone I used to know, all right? It's not a big deal. Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost every time she speaks? He let out a humorless laugh. Come on, don't do this. Not tonight. Then when? I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Because I just spent my wedding night watching my husband flirt with a woman I've never met, and you won't even explain why. His jaw clenched. I wasn't flirting. Bullshit. His nostrils flared, and for a second, I thought he might explode. Instead, he shook his head and looked away. She's just someone from my past. It doesn't matter. It does if she's here. If she's touching you. If you're looking at her like that. Silence. Then, the faintest, smallest smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Are you jealous? Something inside me snapped. I'm not jealous, Brian. I'm your wife. And I deserve to know who the hell she is. That wiped the smirk off his face. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me. Then, finally, he sighed. All right. Valerie and I, we dated. A long time ago. The world tilted slightly. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My fingers curled into fists. And she just happened to show up at our wedding? It's not like that, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. She's a family friend. My mom invited her. Eleanor. Of course. Are you serious? My voice was shaking. Your mother invited your ex to our wedding and you didn't think to tell me? Because it wasn't important. His voice rose in frustration. She's in the past, Nat. I don't care about her. But she cares about you. I didn't say it. I didn't need to. We stood there in tense silence, neither of us willing to break first. Then Brian let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand over his face. Look, can we not do this right now? It's late, and I just want to go to bed. Go to bed. Like I was supposed to just forget about this. About the way she touched him. About the way he looked at her. About the way he lied to me. Every fiber of my being told me that this wasn't over. But I forced myself to nod. Fine, I whispered. Brian exhaled in relief, reached for my hand, but I pulled away before he could touch me. I pretended not to see the flicker of irritation in his eyes. Good night, Brian. And without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving my brand new husband standing alone at the entrance of our honeymoon suite. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of our honeymoon suite, listening to Brian's steady breathing beside me. He had fallen asleep almost immediately, like nothing was wrong, like our argument never happened. Meanwhile, I was stuck replaying every moment of the night in my head. Valerie. The way she touched him. The way he looked at her. The way he lied to me. And Eleanor, his mother, inviting his ex-girlfriend to our wedding like it was completely normal. Like I didn't matter. Like this wasn't the single most humiliating day of my life. I turned my head and looked at Brian, his face relaxed in sleep. I should have felt love. I felt nothing. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Brian's phone vibrating on the nightstand. He was still asleep, his arm draped lazily over his eyes, so I reached for the phone myself. A text notification flashed on the screen. Valerie, had a great time last night. Wish we could have talked more, just the two of us. My stomach twisted. I sat up slowly, staring at the screen. Just the two of us? The rage that had been simmering inside me all night ignited. Brian stirred beside me, groaning as he stretched. Morning, he murmured. Then, noticing the phone in my hand, his expression darkened. What are you doing? I turned to him, holding up the screen. Care to explain why your ex is texting you first thing in the morning, saying she wishes you two had more time together alone? He sat up quickly, grabbing the phone from my hands. Jesus, Nat, do you always go through my messages? I didn't go through anything. It was on the damn screen, Brian. And you didn't answer my question. He ran a hand through his messy hair, exhaling sharply. It's nothing. She was just being friendly. Friendly? Brian, she was all over you last night, and now she's texting you like you two have some unfinished business. I shook my head, my pulse pounding. And you expect me to just believe it's nothing? His jaw clenched. Yes, because it is. You're overreacting. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Overreacting? You let your ex-girlfriend cozy up to you all night at our wedding, and now she's texting you like she's waiting for round two. But sure, I'm just imagining things, right? Jesus, Nat, it's the morning after our wedding. Can we not start the day like this? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I ruin the honeymoon you already ruined? He groaned, throwing the blankets off and getting out of bed. I'm not doing this with you. I followed him as he walked to the hotel bathroom. Doing what, Brian? Asking for the bare minimum from my husband? He spun around, his eyes flashing with frustration. God, I should have known you'd be like this. I froze. Like what? Jealous. Insecure. Clingy. The words hit like a slap. A cold, sick feeling spread through my chest. Excuse me? I whispered. Brian exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. Look, I'm not saying you don't have a right to be upset, but you're blowing this way out of proportion. Nothing happened. Valerie is just a friend. And honestly, I think you're just looking for a reason to fight. I stared at him, my throat tight. Do you even hear yourself? Silence. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the bathroom, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, trembling, my nails digging into my palms. This was our first day as husband and wife. And I already knew I had made the biggest mistake of my life. We were supposed to be flying to Hawaii that evening for our honeymoon. Instead, I spent most of the day locked in the bedroom, staring at my suitcase, wondering if I should even go. Meanwhile, Brian acted like nothing had happened. He showered, ordered breakfast, scrolled through his phone, laughing at stupid memes while I sat there questioning my entire marriage. Finally, in the late afternoon, there was a knock on our hotel door. Brian got up to answer it. And then I heard her voice. Hope I'm not interrupting. Valerie. I shot up from the bed just as she stepped inside. She was dressed casually, her hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, but she still looked annoyingly perfect. What the hell are you doing here? I snapped, crossing my arms. Valerie blinked, feigning innocence. Oh, I just stopped by to drop off a little wedding gift for Brian. She held up a small box wrapped in gold paper. For Brian. Not for us. Brian scratched the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. Val, you didn't have to. It's just something small, she interrupted, smiling at him. Then she turned back to me. I hope you don't mind. I know how sentimental Brian can be. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. Mind? No, I don't mind. I just think it's weird that you're here, in our honeymoon suite, the day after our wedding, giving my husband a personal gift. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. I just wanted to say goodbye before you two left for Hawaii. I won't be around when you get back. Something about the way she said it made my stomach churn. Like she wasn't just talking about leaving town. Like she was saying something else. Brian reached for the box, but I stepped forward, snatching it out of her hand before he could. Valerie raised an eyebrow. I unwrapped the gift in one quick motion, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside was a tie. A black silk tie. A very specific black silk tie. The same damn tie Brian used to wear years ago. The one he always told me he lost. My hands shook. Brian looked like he had just swallowed a grenade. Val, do you remember, Brian? Valerie murmured. I got you this after our trip to Aspen. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Aspen. Their trip to Aspen. The one he had never told me about. I slowly looked up at Brian. You said you lost this tie. His Adam's apple bobbed. Valerie smiled sweetly. Funny how things come back around, huh? And then, before I could explode, she gave Brian one last knowing look and walked out. I stood there, staring at the tie, my pulse hammering. Brian refused to meet my eyes. And that's when I knew. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. He had been lying to me all along. I stood frozen, staring at the black silk tie in my hands like it was a ticking bomb. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out everything except the rapid-fire questions exploding in my brain. Brian had lied. He had told me he lost this tie. That it was just a stupid old thing. But it wasn't. It was from Valerie. And now, here she was, waltzing into our honeymoon suite like she had every right to be there, handing him this little reminder of their past with a smirk that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. Brian still hadn't said a word. I finally looked up at him. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "You said you lost this," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Natalie, it's not." "You said you lost it." His mouth opened, then shut. His gaze darted toward the door, like he was debating whether to just run. "Why did she have it, Brian?" I pressed. "How did she get it?" He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "I don't know." "You don't know?" A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. "She just magically had it after all these years? Maybe I left it at her place." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Her place? So you're admitting you were at her place?" "Jesus, Nat, not like that." He finally snapped, frustration replacing the guilt in his eyes. "It was forever ago. I don't even remember how or when." But I didn't miss the way his fingers twitched. The way his voice wavered. He was lying. "Do you hear yourself?" I whispered. "You don't even have a good excuse. You're just throwing shit at the wall and hoping something sticks." Brian let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "You know what? Believe whatever the hell you want." "Oh, I am," I shot back. "And what I believe is that you've been lying to me for a long time." A tense silence stretched between us. Then Brian sighed and turned away. "We have a flight to catch." I stared at his back, my fingers tightening around the tie. Just like that? No apology? No explanation? He was just going to walk away? I should have thrown the damn tie at his head. Instead, I took a deep breath and made a decision. I wasn't going. Brian could fly to Hawaii alone for all I cared. 1 hour later, I was dragging my suitcase into the hotel lobby, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to just leave. I didn't know where I was going yet. Maybe back home. Maybe to Ashley's. Maybe to a bar where I could drown this nightmare in tequila. But one thing was clear, I wasn't spending another second pretending this marriage wasn't already going down in flames. As I reached the exit, I heard footsteps rushing up behind me. "Nat, wait." I turned, fully expecting Brian. It wasn't him. It was Eleanor. Because of course it was. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her pearls gleaming under the lobby lights. But her expression was unreadable, her sharp eyes scanning me like I was a chess piece she needed to move into the right position. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked smoothly. I let out a bitter laugh. "Away." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That would be a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated. "Oh, Eleanor, I think the real mistake was marrying your son." A flash of irritation crossed her face, but she kept her tone even. "You're upset. I get that. But a woman in your position should think before making rash decisions." I tilted my head. "A woman in my position?" Eleanor took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You don't come from money, Natalie. You don't come from our world. This marriage? It's the best thing that ever happened to you." I blinked. "I'm sorry, did you just say?" "If you walk away now," she interrupted, "you're walking away from a life most women would kill for." I stared at her in stunned silence. Was she serious? Did she actually think I was with Brian for status? "I don't want your life, Eleanor," I said, my voice icy. "I want a husband who doesn't lie to me." Eleanor sighed, like I was an idiot who just wasn't getting it. "Men like Brian, they have their indiscretions. It's just part of marriage." I nearly choked. "Excuse me? Sweetheart." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do you really think all happy marriages are built on complete honesty?" Yes. Yes, I fucking did. But I didn't get the chance to say that, because at that moment, Brian finally showed up. He looked disheveled, like he had just run down from the room, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair a mess. His eyes landed on me, then flickered to his mother. "What's going on?" he asked, slightly out of breath. Eleanor turned to him, exasperated. "Your wife is trying to ruin everything." Brian's gaze snapped back to me. Nat, don't do this. Just come to Hawaii. Let's talk when we get there. I let out a hollow laugh. Talk? You mean lie some more? His jaw tightened. Jesus Christ, can you let this go for 5 seconds? And there it was. He didn't care. Not really. He didn't care that I was hurt. He didn't care that I felt betrayed. He only cared about how it looked. Eleanor sighed and shook her head. I told you she wouldn't understand, Brian. She's just... I turned to her, my voice sharp as a knife. I swear to God, if you finish that sentence, I will cause a scene in this lobby that even you won't be able to spin. Silence. For the first time, Eleanor looked nervous. I turned back to Brian. Have a nice honeymoon. Then I grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door. And this time, no one stopped me. I ended up at Ashley's apartment 20 minutes later, standing outside her door with my suitcase, my mascara smudged, my wedding ring feeling like a handcuff on my finger. Ashley opened the door, took one look at me, and pulled me inside. You're staying here, she said firmly. I dropped my bag and collapsed onto her couch, my entire body trembling. I think my marriage is already over, I whispered. Ashley handed me a glass of wine and sat beside me. Good. Because Brian is trash and I've been waiting for you to realize it. A broken laugh escaped me. I can't believe this is real. Ashley put an arm around me, her expression fierce. Screw him. Screw his mother. You don't need them. You are going to be fine. I exhaled slowly, gripping the wine glass. Maybe she was right. Maybe walking away was the only thing I could do. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because something told me Valerie wasn't done with Brian. And I wasn't done getting answers. I woke up on Ashley's couch to the smell of coffee and the dull ache of betrayal pounding behind my eyes. The events of the past 24 hours crashed down on me like a tidal wave. The wedding, Valerie, the tie, Eleanor's smug face, Brian's lies. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples as Ashley walked in, holding 2 steaming mugs. Morning, almost divorced lady, she said, handing me a cup. I let out a groan. Too soon. She plopped onto the couch beside me. Listen, I know you're still processing all this, but I need to ask, what's next? Are we getting drunk? Filing for annulment? Setting his suits on fire? I huffed a laugh, but the truth was I didn't know. My marriage had barely lasted a day. I had walked away, sure, but a part of me still felt like I needed answers. Answers that I knew Brian would never willingly give me. And then my phone buzzed. Brian, we need to talk. Meet me at the house. I stared at the screen. Ashley peeked over my shoulder and scoffed. No, absolutely not. He wants to gaslight you into crawling back. Maybe I muttered. Or maybe he's finally ready to tell me the truth. She rolled her eyes. Nat, come on. The truth? From Brian. I exhaled. She had a point. But still, I needed to hear it. I needed to see his face when he tried to lie one last time. Fine, I said, standing up. I'll go. But I'm not going alone. Ashley smirked. Damn right you're not. When we pulled up to the house, Brian was already waiting outside. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair messy, dark circles under his eyes, pacing the driveway like a man waiting for his execution. Good. Ashley parked across the street, but stayed in the car, ready to storm in if things got ugly. I took a deep breath and stepped out. Brian looked up, his expression unreadable. You actually came. I folded my arms. Don't be so surprised. He ran a hand through his hair. Nat, Don't, I cut him off. Just tell me the truth. All of it. No more bullshit. He exhaled, staring down at his shoes. Then he finally spoke. Valerie and I. He swallowed. We were together for a long time. Before you. But she wasn't just my ex, Nat. He looked up at me, guilt flashing in his eyes. She was my fiancée. The air left my lungs. My legs almost buckled. Fiancée. Not ex-girlfriend. Fiancée. I felt like the ground had cracked open beneath me. You were engaged? My voice barely came out. Brian nodded stiffly. Yeah. You never told me that. Because it was over. Was it? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, she still thinks you belong to her. He let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, well, she never really let go. Even after we broke things off, she still found ways to. I don't know. Be around. I stared at him. And you just let her? He didn't answer. My head was spinning. Why did you two break up? Brian hesitated. She cheated on me. I almost laughed. Wow! The irony. Brian's jaw tightened. It wasn't just once. It was a lot. I was in love with her, and she made me feel like an idiot. Like I was never enough. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But you still kept her in your life, I said, my voice flat. He exhaled. I didn't mean to. She's manipulative. You don't say. Brian shook his head. I thought I was done with her. Then she showed up at the wedding, and he broke off, his gaze flickering toward the house. I don't know, not seeing her again, I took a step back. You hesitated. He looked at me, confused. What? You just hesitated. My pulse pounded. When I asked if you were done with her. You didn't say yes. You didn't say no. You just stood there. Brian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I laughed bitterly. You still love her. No. His voice was sharp. Immediate. But the look on his face? It said everything. You do, I whispered. Silence. That was my answer. And that's when I realized I had been fighting for a marriage that was already dead. Brian must have sensed it too because his shoulders sagged. I don't want to hurt you, Nat. You already did. He looked away, ashamed. So what now? I reached into my pocket and pulled off my wedding ring. And then I pressed it into his palm. This is what now, I said. His fingers curled around the ring, his expression shattering. Natalie. I shook my head. Don't. Just don't. Then I turned around and walked away without looking back. Ashley was already grinning when I got back in the car. You dumped his ass, didn't you? I let out a shaky laugh. Oh yeah. She gunned the engine. Good. Now let's get margaritas. God, yes. And just like that, I felt lighter. Like I had finally cut the weight that had been dragging me down for months. Was it painful? Yes. Was it humiliating? Absolutely. But for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was. And I was never going to settle for less than I deserved again.